Today is a very special day, Mother's Day, and we have child dedications. So right now, I'm going to invite the rest of my family up here, and then the other families that are having their kiddos dedicated. You can make your way up to the stage right now, and I'm going to pass it over to Tony.
Awesome. We've got 3 families coming up here today, and this is a fun thing that we get to do every so often. And not every church does this. Some churches do it differently and whatnot. Some churches baptize some like babies. We do that a little bit differently. So, but with kids, we say to families, hey, would you like to dedicate your child in a way that says, hey, I want to commit to raising my kid to know Jesus and follow Jesus for the long haul. And so we get to basically celebrate and partner with parents today as they make their way up here. We're going to squish and get a little bit friendly and close. We got 3 different families coming up. Oh, look at that little chunky one. I'm going to introduce the families real quick. I'm not going to ask them to say anything, I promise. But just the kids that are getting dedicated today. Down here we've got Alex and Bubba, and they're dating. they're dedicating. I hope you go on dates too. They're okay. This is a different name. Tallulah. I was going to say Talayla, so I just wanted to get it right. Tallulah, and their little girl Lennon we dedicated a couple years ago. I remember that. And then we've got Lindsay and Will dedicating Isaiah. And I'm going to step aside here a little bit more. And we've got Sheldon and Rachel dedicating Ayla and Aiden. And it's an exciting day. It's a day for you guys as families just to say, hey, today's the day that we are just making a commitment. You've probably already made this commitment as far as the way you want to raise your kids. But today, as part of your faith community, we're coming alongside you and say, we're cheering for you. We want to help you. We want to stand beside you as you make this commitment to raise your kids to love Jesus for the long haul. And it's a privilege. In fact, it's obvious in Scripture that kids are a gift. They're a gift to each family. And as you know, some of you have older kids. You wonder as they get older if they're really a gift or maybe punishment. But when they come into your life in your family, it's such a gift. It's a precious gift. And if you remember, like you guys probably do, that moment of first holding your baby. That moment where you first get to put them on your chest, that moment you first get to pray over them, that moment where you first get to this long-awaiting gift to come out of you to be in your arms. And it's such a gift. And to be able to stand up here with you and as a church to be able to support you in this, we're cheering for you. And my prayer for you as parents that you would just know you're never alone in this, that you have a whole community that is wanting you to succeed, and we want to come alongside of you. I'm going to ask that you just make this commitment with me. And in a moment, I'll say, do you agree? And you can say, I do. Basically, it's this, that you would, as parents, you would agree to teach your kids to follow Jesus in a way, and some of the most basic understanding that we have about God, that you would teach your kids to love God, that you would create environments intentionally where they could understand, know about, feel, and learn about and experience God, that you would teach your kids to love other people the way that Jesus has loved other people, and that you would model model to them in your own homes, and that you teach your kids to love themselves. That you would really do well at helping them grow up with a confidence that they are loved and they are worth loving, and to love themselves well, and to be people that are not just good inherently, but they can also do good in this world. And so if you would agree with that, parents, would you just say, I do? I do. Well, we want to pray for you. And just pray for you as you continue in this journey of parenting. So as a church, you don't have to do anything weird. You don't have to stand up. You don't have to. But if you just want to agree in prayer with me as we pray over these families today, let's do this together. God, we're grateful for these kids. We're grateful for the gift that they are into these families' lives, but just not the gift they are to each of these individual families, but God, the gift they are into this world, and that they are agents of good. They're children that can grow up and do so much good and be models to the people around them as they have homes and families that are like a solid foundation for them to understand you and build a relationship with you, and that from there that they are going to be a blessing to the communities, the neighborhoods, the schools, and the peoples, and the future marriages and families that they're part of because of the commitment that the parents are making today. The commitment that the parents are making over these weeks, months, and years of their childhood life. So God, we stand beside them today. We cheer them on. And we thank you for the gift of these children. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Well, thanks, guys. We have just a gift for you. You may have already gotten it, a certificate. If you want to go ahead and make your way off stage, let's give them a hand. Some of you might say, I have the best mom. And others of you might say, my mom is the worst. Some of you might say, like, I just love spending time with my mom. And some might say, I can't wait to get away and get out of the house. Some might say, my mom is just awesome. And some of you say, I can't stand her. Some might be like, I just love it when my mom comes by and just unannounced, uninvited, just stops by and just wants to hang out. And others of you might be like, can you say helicopter parent? Like, don't do that, mom. Some of you might say something like, I just love that my mom always just knows the right things to say. And others of you are like, my mom is so out of touch and doesn't understand my life. I wonder what narrative that you tell yourself. What's the story that you tell yourself, even about your relationship with your own mom? And the reality is that we all have different relationships with our moms, and some of us have ideal relationships that you love and you're proud of, and some of you are like, I wish it was a little bit different, but it's pretty good. I just wish there's some things we could work on. And some of you have a relationship with your mom that you're like, I just wish, this is just not, I don't think this is the right way it was supposed to go, but it's your reality of what you've experienced. Or maybe you've got a journey of a mix of all of that when you look back at your life. What's the story that you tell yourself when you think about your relationship with your mom? And my hunch is that if we were honest, for all of us, we would say that one characteristic that should summarize this story between mother and child is this word love. That love should be a characteristic that describes this relationship. It should be a component of it. Something that, when you write the story of my relationship with my mom, and my relationship with my kids as a mom, there should be love within that story. That makes sense to each one of us here today. That makes sense that if we think about a healthy family, a good family, that love should be a characteristic that's part of that story, a defining characteristic within the story that we tell ourselves about our own mom. What's interesting is that it's not just in the family that we would say that we should experience love, but even beyond the family, it's actually one of the characteristics that's supposed to summarize the church. This idea of love, this characteristic of love, when you tell yourself a story about something, when you think of the church and followers of Jesus, this is a word that should be used to summarize a key component, a key characteristic of the church. In fact, this is a word that the church should specialize in. Because our founder, Jesus, he actually, at one point, he looked at his disciples and he gave them some of these words. In fact, the words we're about to see here on the screen, this comes just shortly before Jesus was arrested and brutally beaten and ultimately sacrificed his life on a cross where he was unjustly killed and murdered this day. And just shortly before this event, he gives these words to his disciples. He looks at them and he says, hey, I want you to know, in fact, a new commandment I give you. He says this, a new commandment, and this should cause them, and it should cause us even to lean in. Jesus, what's this commandment that you give us? I've heard of all these other commandments. What's this commandment? And he says, a new commandment I give you. You are to love one another. You're to love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you just simply would love one another. Jesus says, hey, this is what we're going to be famous for. This is what we're going to be known for. In fact, you should know that there's a church in the community because there's a group of people who do this really, really well. There's a group of people who look at others and love others really, really, really well. Jesus is like, this is important that we get this right, that we do this well. In fact, this is a component that has attracted people to the Christian faith throughout centuries. This component, this characteristic of love. When we tell the story of the church, it's a story of love and God's love for us, and in return, it's our love for other people. And so while it's a characteristic that's in that story, it's also something that's so easy. The longer you're in the story, the longer you're in church, you grew up in church, you've been in church for a long time now, it's so easy to read a passage, just a couple verses like this, and be like, and you read along, you nod, you agree, yeah, that sounds good, I agree with that. And it's far easier to nod and agree than it actually is sometimes to apply it to our lives. We're like, oh yeah, that's good, I love people, I think I do a pretty good job. But are we really applying this to our daily lives? See, sometimes it's easier for Christians just to make this about our services, how good our church services are, this to make it about our right beliefs and our theology of oh yeah, that's what we should be known for, our theologies. But Jesus says, by this, all men will know that you're my disciples. And sometimes we take a verse like this and we read it and we nod, but we don't apply it. or the way that we apply it, if we're honest about how we apply it, let's just read it a little bit differently. So Jesus says, a new commandment I give you, you are to love those who are like you. A new commandment I give you, you're to love those who believe right like you do. A new commandment I give you, you're to love those who aren't mean to you. A new commandment I give you, you're to love those that are in your neighborhood that actually don't let their dogs poop on your lawn. Those are the ones you love. A new commandment I give you, you're to love those who are easy to love. Just as I have loved you, so you must love those who aren't mean. Just as I have loved you, so you must love those who don't stab you in the back at work. This is how we often, actually, if we're being honest, this is how we often apply a verse like this, is we don't say, we read along and say, oh yeah, that's good, love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this all men will know you're my disciples, if you love one another. But it's harder to apply it. And over the longer we're in church, the easier it is just to compartmentalize. Yeah, love others. But on the side, we kind of just do what we're going to do. And there's always those people that we exclude from the one another's on this list. There's always those people that are like, yeah, of course God wants me to love others, but even them? And it's hard to put this into practice. It's hard to apply this sometimes. And so we struggle navigating through this. And during this little mini-series that we're doing for these 2 weeks, we're going to talk about our relationships with other people and the stories that we tell ourselves about the people that are in our lives and the people even that we see from afar. And the reality of these stories that we tell ourselves, they're going to directly impact our thinking, which we cannot escape then the fact that as it impacts our thinking, it is going to also influence the way that we do or don't love other people, just simply because of the stories that we tell ourselves. And my hope is that for some of us, we could begin to kind of reshape this. For some of us, we will resume in some areas what we've already been doing. And for some of us, maybe it will just bring an acceleration and a heightened awareness and attention. It's like, man, I can get better at this, at the loving others part. The loving others part of difficult people. The loving others part that people that sometimes I just put in the other category, and I sometimes exclude them from the list. And if you're a follower of Jesus, this is so important because if we don't do this, we potentially miss out on the opportunity for helping the church be famous for what Jesus says it's supposed to be famous for, that we love others well. And what happens is when we tell ourselves a story, what we're doing in our head is we're creating a narrative. And a narrative, in fact, if you've got your notes, I'd encourage you to pull those out and take some notes and fill in the blanks as we go along here. But a narrative is this. A narrative is a story that connects and explains events or experiences. A narrative is a story, and we don't have all the details, but we experience one thing, and we then write a story, write a narrative that helps connect the dots in our own head. Did you know that your brains are always they're always thinking, and they're hardwired to be able to form these narratives. It's just something naturally within us to write these stories in our head. And after years and years and years of studies, neurologists have actually gained some insights on how the brain works. And so your brain is constantly working. One of the things they've noticed, your brain is constantly working to kind of create some shortcuts, because there's so much that you're taking in all the time. So your brain wants to help you connect the dots faster and take some shortcuts and connect one thing to the next thing to save you time and to save you energy. And there's two things that your brain is doing all the time, two different ways that your brain is learning all the time. One of them is probabilistic learning. It's learning in a way that's trying to predict what just might happen next, the probability of what will come next. It's like taking the odds from one experience to the next experience to another experience and everything you've experienced, and it's looking at the probability of what is going to happen next, so your brain doesn't have to work as hard and run like this probability test every time you're in a new situation. It can refer to something that you've learned before, or something you've repeated before, an experience you've had before, and it knows the probability of, this is what's going to happen next. And your brain then creates some shortcuts so you don't have to run the probability test every time you're in a new situation. Another way your brain is learning is pattern learning. It's looking at connecting the dots between repeated events, detecting patterns like cause and effect of like this happens, so of course then this is going to happen next. And then it stores away these patterns for quick reference when you have a situation come up or you experience something and your brain's like, oh yeah, we've done this before. Okay, I know what happens next. We've been here, done that. And so your brain can work easier and faster for you. Both of these practices are where our assumptions come from. It's our brain going, oh yeah, we've seen this before. We've done this before. We got this. Okay, we know what's going to happen. With some probability, we know what we're going to do. Don't worry. And you just take a mental shortcut, and your brain's like, I'll take it from here. You don't have to know more information. You don't have to connect the dots. I've already doing this for you. It takes a mental shortcut. And your brain does this with everything. It's why you like some dogs and not others. Because your brain has given you a narrative that says you like cute and cuddly dogs. But your brain also tells you a narrative that you want to stay away from scary and ugly dogs. Okay? And some of you have ugly dogs. Okay? And some of you, even worse, have cats. Okay? But your brain gives you this narrative of how we respond. This is why you can talk about or see a picture and instantly of maybe one of your favorite foods, and you just catch a glimpse of a picture or a smell, or you think about it, and all of a sudden your mouth starts to water because your brain has told you a narrative that you love this food. And then there's those other foods that just kind of like cause a gag reflex. Like, I don't want that food. I don't want to eat that. I'm not going to go there. Or you have a restaurant, one of your favorite restaurants, but you go there and it might not even be your restaurant's fault, and you leave with kind of a stomach bug, and now your brain has created a narrative like, we don't go back to that restaurant because I can't stomach that again. I don't want to experience that again, right? Our brain does this all the time. It's how every single one of us in this room operates. You can sometimes kind of make these snap decisions just by watching a little bit of a movie preview or hearing a few lyrics and a few tunes of a song, or you see an ad that goes up for a home that's for sale or a sale that's even in the store, and you can instantly, your brain's like, yep, that's the one. That's what we're looking for. That's the one we like. That sounds right. That's what we like. You don't even have to have that much information, but because your brain has experienced so much and has done all this learning for you, and it stores it in you, and it takes shortcuts, and you can just kind of know instantly, like a snap decision of like, oh yeah, we like that. Or, oh yeah, we don't like that. Your brain does, like, oh, hey, don't worry about it. Don't think any more about it. Don't gain any more information. I've already got this for you, and you already know that you don't want that. You don't like that. Your brain function, this function is so helpful in everyday life. It helps us when it comes to our routine tasks and ordinary decisions. It has established these habits of how we do this. But these are not the only things that we create these narratives about. We create narratives about people too. We create narratives about the people that we come across, that we experience things with, the people that we work with, live near, do life with, right? And what happens is our brain, as we associate different people, we then create different narratives with just a little bit of data, a little bit of information. And what happens is basically we have like these cue cards for the people in our life that we take a little data in and we're like, yep, okay. We know what that person's like. Oh, really? Okay, yeah. And you create these little cue cards where your brain doesn't actually have to, you don't have to get to know them. You don't have to know their story because you just saw what they were wearing. You saw where they were from. You saw these different things. And now you don't have to give it much thought. And you've already formed an opinion. What you've done is you've written a narrative about them in your brain. The story you tell yourself about them is, oh, they're this person, so that means they're this way. And we reduce people down to these little cue cards. Even if you are, like, maybe you're a fan of the like personality tests. One that's been popular in the last 10 years is Enneagram. Any of you like Enneagram? Okay, Enneagram is, these are helpful tools, helpful tests that help you get to know yourself and get to know the people around you and how you relate to them. But it's so easy to take this information and to simplify someone down to like, oh yeah, you're an 8. Yeah, that makes sense. That's such an 8 thing to say. Yeah, I can tell. Yeah, you're such an 8. Right? And you just reduce them down to their number. And while it can be helpful, it can also not be the whole picture. But our brain loves stuff like this because it helps us basically simplify people down to just like a little cue card, right? You find out, oh, hey, where are you from? Oh, you're from California? Let's see. Oh, yeah, California. Yeah, I know how you vote. I know. Oh, let me guess. You moved up here? What, you didn't have enough water, enough electricity, so you move up here? Okay, yeah. Like, I get it. You're from California. Where are you from? Oh, Washington. Oh, okay, Washington. Oh, not the Seattle side. Oh, okay. That's a different card. That's a different card. Here it is. You're from the east side, right next to Idaho? Oh, that's actually right here. Oh, yeah, makes sense. You're wearing camo. You know, like, we reduce people down to these cue cards because all you need is a little bit of data information, a little bit of data. Write it down, take note. Your brain takes note, creates a shortcut, and now you just know everything that you need to know about that person. You just got it figured out. You don't need to know more. Like, your brain says, hey, you can stop thinking about it because we already know them. And the problem is we're also tempted to do this in far more serious areas, serious categories when it comes to how we relate to people around us. Unfortunately, we do this with things like skin color and gender, sexual orientation, relationship status, religious beliefs, political parties. We create these cue cards. Oh, you vote this way? Oh, you've been single for how long? You've been married how many times? And we create these cue cards. And you just give me about one or two pieces of this data, this information, and my brain starts going, oh yeah, we know this. We know who they are. We've got it all figured out. I'll take it from here, right? And we don't just do this with strangers. We do this with people that we know well. We do this with family. And family, we know them well, which makes sometimes these narratives far more entrenched. And what happens then is we start having cue cards that are deeply entrenched in this relationship, and we start putting things like people's motives down. And now all of a sudden your spouse does something, and you have the cue card that judges their motive, like, oh, you always do this. I know what you have friends in your life and they have some bad habits, and they've got some things that are like behaviors that just annoy you, and you're just like, you can just so quickly write them off. You're like, oh, yep, they did it again. Yep, that's just who they always are. You have family members that you judge based on their behaviors, and you based on some of their attitudes and their tendencies. And I get it, because that's what you experience, but so often then what we've done is we belittle them down to this cue card that says, well, they're just that way. And I don't know, I don't trust them, I don't even really like them, I kind of tolerate them at the holidays, but I don't know where to go from there. So we do this all the time. And our natural inclination, and even it's a practice habit that we have, where we're forming these narratives about one another. And I don't really honestly remember a time where I saw this more prevalent than in the months following COVID. When COVID started and everybody was separated, and then everybody was on social media. And what happened is all these social injustice issues rise up around COVID things and around other things. And so what happens then, you're following people on social media, and you see that they comment or they like or they post something that you don't agree with, and you just write them off. Because their cue cards of, well, if they like this post or they posted this, then this must be who they actually are, and I don't want to surround myself with someone like that anymore, so I'm gonna write them off. I don't need them in my life. We don't seek more information. We don't look at understanding. We don't lean in with curiosity. We just write it on the cue card, and we just form an opinion, and we have a judgment, and heck, that's what it is. That's who they are. And we reduce people down to these cue cards. The capacity that our brain has is really, really helpful when it comes to dogs and ice cream flavors. But unfortunately, it can be really, really hurtful when it comes to the way that we relate to and love the people that are around us in our lives. Especially if you're a follower of Jesus, and Jesus' command is that we're to love other people as he has loved us, so that we must love other people. And by this is what the church will be famous for. And when we live in this narrative way, it really, really hurts us. In fact, there's two kind of dangerous outcomes of this, and these are in your notes here. One is this, is that narratives will simplify what can't be simplified. They simplify what can't be simplified. It reduces somebody down to this cue card, and all of a sudden their entire personality and their belief system and their struggles and just what they've gone through in life and their total life experience, it reduces it down, it simplifies it to just simply a few different data points on a cue card. And the moment that we do that, we're in trouble, because at that point, we're most certainly never going to really get to know that person, because we've already made a judgment about them. We're most likely going to misunderstand their story and misunderstand their character and misdiagnose their situation, because we can't take shortcuts for people. Because people are image bearers of God. We are complex image bearers of God. The person on your cue card, this person never actually exists. It's far more complex than what we simplified. And you take this complex human and with this complex background and their whole life story and their situation and their experiences that have led them to even act the way that they act today and believe the way that they believe today and do the things that they do today. And when we just narrow it down to a few data points on the cue card, we miss who they actually are. And it's going to be hard to ever actually get to know them. It's also really offensive, right? I actually don't mind when I do this to other people so much, but it's really offensive when people do it to me, right? Like, wouldn't you agree that you don't like to be put in a box? You don't like to be feeling like someone judged you prematurely before they ever actually got to know you? They had a problem with you, sure. Maybe you did something that wasn't your best day. You had a sour attitude, whatever it happened. But then they just form this narrative about you. They believe these things about you, and they even say it to other people that he's just awful. Or they lie, they cheat. And they never came to you and asked you a question. They never tried to get to know you. They just formed a narrative, and that's hurtful. It's offensive. We don't like it when people do it to us. But yet it's so easy for us to do it to others. Another danger that comes from this is that narratives permit what should never be permitted. Narratives permit what should never be permitted. I've got 3 kids, and sometimes I'm around my kids, and they start talking about other people, and what they have to say about other people is not always very nice. Oh, Dad, this person at school, this person on the bus, their bus stories are always like, oh my gosh. It's like there's no supervision on the bus, okay? And so everything is just, it's the wild, wild west on the bus, basically. And so they tell you, but sometimes they're talking really poorly about, and I'm like, hey, should we talk like that about that person? And they're like, no. I mean, I guess not, but Dad, it's okay, they're not here. They don't know that we said this. And if I'm being honest, and I'm thinking about this, I'm like, man, where are they learning this from to talk like that about other people? And of course, it's their mother. But honestly, I'm like, man, as their dad, I think I've modeled this to them sometimes. I think they've heard me talk to a friend or another family member about someone else in the family before. I think they've heard me, if I'm being honest, they've heard me talk poorly about someone before, maybe even someone from the church. Not you, of course. And I'm like, man. And I do that. I get up on stage and say, hey, you should, like if you were to ask me, should we ever talk poorly about people? No. I do this for a living. This is a big part of what I talk about, the way we love other people. And yet sometimes I miss the mark and I model something to my kids, and now my kids are doing this, and I want to help train them and guide them and say, hey, we can do better. We don't have to just assume something about, we don't have to write these narratives about them based on one behavior on the bus one afternoon. We can do it better than that. Because we write these narratives, we reduce people down to the cue card, and it's like, oh, you voted for who? For who? Yeah, okay, I know you. Oh, you live in what neighborhood? Yeah, I know you. You believe, wait, you actually believe that? Okay, and yeah, I know who you are now. And because we take what we believe about somebody through just a little bit of data, and create this cue card, what it does, it makes it like, oh man, if they're now the other, that gives us this permission to speak poorly of them. Well, they deserve it. I mean, it's true. It's what I experienced, and so I'm not saying nothing that's not true, and it permits what should never be permitted in the way that we talk about and treat other people, even behind their back. And it's how we, in just like a moment, we can go from this person is like an image bearer of God to now this person is like an enemy, and I don't like them, and their attitude was off today, and it really put me out, and so now I'm going to speak poorly. And this is how right away, in just a moment, we can have disrespect, we can insult, we can ignore people, we exclude people, we mock people, we devalue people, we abandon people, we neglect people, we attack and we rob, we excommunicate, we disqualify, we pass over, we slander, we vilify, we even go to war with people over these narratives. It's exactly what narratives are doing to us in our families and in our communities and our workplaces, and unfortunately, even within the church, within brothers and sisters in Christ, that when we write these narratives and we live this way, in fact, when we live a narrative-driven way, your family, if you have a narrative-driven family, it can't be a healthy family. If you have a narrative-driven marriage, it's an unhealthy marriage. If you have a narrative-driven friendship, it's probably an unhealthy friendship. If you have a narrative-driven workplace, it can't be a healthy workplace. And if our community, our faith community, is a narrative-driven community, it's not going to be a healthy community. So we need to do our best as followers of Jesus to practice an alternative to this way of relating to people through narratives. We need to do our best to continue to not simplify what can't really and should never be simplified, and to do our best to not permit what should never be permissible. And what's at stake for us as followers of Jesus is missing the mark on being known for what Jesus says, this is what you should be known for. This is what I want you to be known for. And this narrative-driven approach to life and this narrative-driven approach to how we treat people around us, we are going to miss the mark in the way that we treat and love other people. And so just for a moment, as we kind of conclude today, let's take a look at a few things, a few ways that Jesus operated in the New Testament with the people around him, how he saw people. Because if you were just even a casual reader of Scripture and you were to open it up and read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these eyewitness accounts of Jesus, you would notice, even without study, even without a Bible background, even without an education, you would notice that Jesus seemed to always operate outside the narratives. Jesus seemed to operate outside the narratives. There's a story of a guy named Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, some of you know this, he was a short dude. Not sure why that really matters, but he was short and he was a tax collector. And one day Jesus was walking through the town with crowds of people, and because he's short, he climbed up a tree because he also, like many people, wanted to see Jesus. But as a tax collector, the narrative that was written about Zacchaeus is that he was no good. Because in his community, he betrayed his own people to line his own pockets. He's getting wealthy off taking taxes from his own people so he can pay Rome, and he takes a portion of it for himself. And so he is a cheater, he is a betrayer. That's the narrative, that's the cue card of Zacchaeus, that he's a cheater, betrayer, okay? Zacchaeus, we don't like him. We go to him because we have to pay our taxes, but we don't like Zacchaeus. Well, on this day, as Jesus walked through the town and Zacchaeus climbs this tree, Jesus actually sees Zacchaeus atop the tree, and he says, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. What? Jesus, you can't go to his house. He's a cheater and a betrayer. Jesus, he's a tax collector. I see it right here. We don't hang out with those people, Jesus. We exclude him from that list, the love one another list. Jesus, and to go to his house, you're like putting yourself on like friend level with him. Jesus, are you sure you know what you're doing? He operates outside the narrative. There's a moment where some religious men brought a woman who was caught in the act of adultery, and they all show up in front of Jesus one day, and they drag her in, and they've got stones in their hand, because in their custom, their law allowed you to stone a woman who's caught in adultery like this. And we don't know the whole story about what actually went on, but Jesus, these religious people bring him before Jesus, and Jesus, he doesn't even like pay attention to him at first. It's like he stoops down and he just doodles in the dust for a little bit, and then he finally stands up and he looks at the woman, and he looks at the guys, and he sees the rocks in their hand, and he knows the narrative that they have about her. She's a wrongdoer, she's an adulterer, she's a sinner, and they see what they want to do, or he sees what they want to do, and Jesus just looks at them and says, hey guys, how about this? How about whoever one of you is without sin, go ahead and throw the first stone. Whichever one of you, go ahead. What? Jesus, we caught her like red-handed, Jesus. Okay. So whatever, if you've never done anything wrong before, you've never done anything you regret, you've never done anything that you would love to have back and you could redo, go ahead and throw the first stone. And the guys dropped their stones and they walked away. We could talk about stories like a leper who, in this culture, as a leper, you were an outcast. You were exiled from the community because you had this disease and people couldn't touch you, they couldn't be near you. Jesus could have also taken that same narrative and said, yep, that's the leper, we stay away from them. But he went up, he embraced, he laid hands on, he prayed for, and healed them. We could talk about stories about this Roman centurion who came up to Jesus and he needed a miracle. And Jesus could have been like, you're a Roman soldier. You're the enemy. Your cue card says, not friend of mine. Right? Why would I help you? Yet Jesus did a miracle. We could read stories about a prostitute who came to Jesus, and like many other people who were shocked that Jesus even just let her in the room. They're like, she's no good. She's a prostitute. She's like, and yet Jesus lets her clean his feet with her tears. He operates outside of the narratives in every situation. The second thing is Jesus came to cancel sin, not people. This is important. Jesus came to cancel sin, not people. It's precisely our narratives that have led us to become what we now call as a cancel culture. It's the narratives that we write and think about, the stories we tell ourselves in our head that allows us to cancel people in our lives, right? Where we write people off because of something they said, because of something they did. And it doesn't matter how long ago it was. It doesn't matter the full story. It doesn't matter if they did say it and they do regret it and they've grown from it. It doesn't matter, but we just cancel them. Nope, they're no good. They can't do any good from here. We can't associate with them. We don't want any part of that. But as followers of Jesus, it's so important to us to remember that Jesus came to cancel sin, not to cancel people. In fact, in John chapter 3, in John's eyewitness account of the life of Jesus, Jesus was walking with a man named Nicodemus. And Nicodemus, he was a religious man. He was considered a Pharisee, so we're kind of the religious elite. And Nicodemus had a narrative about Jesus. He had his cue card about who Jesus is, and he looks at Jesus and says, okay, Jesus, you're a religious man. You are a godly man. You're doing all these miracles. You must be from God. And because you're from God, that you're like this holy man, this godly man. And what his narrative about a holy man, a godly man, a man from God, at this point, his narrative is like, oh, you must be here to condemn us, to tell us all the things that we're doing wrong and to set us straight, to make sure we're on the straight and narrow. That's his cue card. That's his narrative that he has about Jesus. That's what he thought of when he thought of Jesus. But yet, what we see is in John 3:17, it says this, "For God did not send his son into the," this is Jesus' response to Nicodemus, "For God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him." Not to pull out everybody's cue card and be like, okay, I know you. Yep, and I know you. Yep. Oh, there you are. Yep, I know you too. And take all of our wrongdoing and say, yep, you guys, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. And you're in trouble. You're going to get in trouble. Not to condemn the world, but to save the world. And if we're not careful to drop our narratives and to see people the way that Jesus sees people, then we're in danger of making people think that Jesus came to this world to condemn them. As the church, followers of Jesus, hear me. If we're not careful to see people the way that Jesus sees people, we're in danger of them never feeling that God is even approachable, that God could never love them, that God could never be for them, that God could never invite them into his family just because our message to them and because the narratives we believe about them is God came to condemn you. Because I know enough about you, and I saw how you voted, and I saw what you did last Friday, and I saw these things, and it's not good. God didn't come to condemn, but to save. That means that I was at one point separated from God, but now I'm connected. That means that I was carrying a weight of guilt and a weight of shame, but the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, it provided forgiveness of sins once and for all. The Apostle Paul, he explains it this way. He says, this means that everyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone and a new life has begun. So don't miss this. When we become aware of our own brokenness, and the severity of just how jacked up we are sometimes. And we give ourselves the grace to actually navigate through the complexities of our lives and the layers of our lives. And we say, you know what, Tony, you haven't always gotten it right. You haven't always done it right. You've missed the mark a number of times, too many to count. And we give ourselves grace, and we can see ourselves through the lens of like, God, thank you for loving me. God, thank you for your grace. Thank you for your forgiveness. Thank you for inviting me into your family. Thank you for creating me. And then, at some point, there's like a wall. And we hold that same grace back from giving that to someone else. God, thank you for loving me, but we don't feel like maybe God should love them. We're missing it. We're missing the mark. And we miss it because we write narratives about people that are just not fair. We oversimplify people, and then we give ourselves permission to speak and think about people that are it's contradictory to the way Jesus sees them and thinks about them. Jesus died for everyone. This is in your notes. Jesus died for everyone. He asked us if we would just love everyone. He died for everyone. He asked us that we would just love everyone. Every single one of us, whether we realize it or not, at one point or another in our lives was at odds with God because of sin, because of behavior and attitudes and desires and pursuits and characters. But he has accepted us and invited us to be into his family. In fact, he didn't look through and just read through our cue cards and make a judgment on us for that. He says, oh, you're an image bearer of God. I've come for you, for each one of you. He looked at us through the lens of love. And again, the Apostle Paul says, God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. While we were still sinners, God came and he died for us to show us through love that while we were a sinner, well, it says sinner on our cue card, God says forgiven. When it says broken, God says made new. When it says orphan, God says a child of mine. When it says abandoned, God says I know your name. When it says loser and you're never amount to anything, God says you are more than enough. When it says that you can never do enough to dig your way out of the pit that you've put yourself in, God says, hey, I've created a path for you, that I see you right where you are at. I accept you and I love you. Jesus says, you know why I treat people differently than you do? Because when I see them, I don't see their cue card. I don't have a preconceived narrative about them. I just know them as they are. A son of God, a child of God, a daughter of God. Jesus says, I just treat people differently because I see them differently. In fact, our just the final thought that I wanted to give you today, and this I think brings us to our application point, is that when you see people the way Jesus sees people, then you'll treat people the way Jesus treats them. When you can start to see people as Jesus sees people, you'll start to treat them the way Jesus treats them. And so here's just a very practical way to think about this as we think about our next steps from today. Think about every arena of your life. You've got your home, your family, your neighborhood, maybe your workplace, your rec sports team that you play on, or your kids' soccer team. You've got your church community. You've got the people around you. Think of one arena of your life and pick one person in your head. Think of this person right now. Think of this person, just one person in your head right now. You're like, hey, I don't really think I've done a good job of getting to know them. And I've probably actually believed some things based on a behavior I saw or some words I heard at one point, but I don't think that represents them very well. But it's influenced the way I think about them. And would you commit to this week in one arena of your life for one person? Say, I want to actually get to know their story a little bit. I want to get to know them. I'm going to lean in with curiosity. I'm going to ask questions about them. I'm going to let them talk, and I'm going to ask more questions. I'm going to get to know them, because once you get to know them and you can see them as a human and not just a few data points on a cue card, it's hard to just hold this narrative to be all true. You actually get to know them for who they are. And there's so much beauty in that. There's so much, you get to tell yourself a better story when you really get to know somebody for who they are. And you begin to see them the way that God sees them, and you begin to treat them the way that God treats them. Can we do that? And maybe you're here today or you're watching online and you're just simply at a spot where you say, I actually have not believed a good narrative about myself. I don't think I could even love myself. I think I'm too damaged. I'm too far gone. I don't know that God could ever love me. Here's what I want you to know for every single one of you, is that God is building a family and he's invited you into it. And there's nothing you could have ever done that makes you too separated from God that you're not invited into this family. And today might be the day that you make a decision of faith that says, God, I want to put my trust and my faith in you. And you recognize, maybe you've got some mistakes, you've got some guilt, you've got some shame. You say, God, would you just take all my past, all my life, and say, God, even as Paul said, while we were still sinners, Christ came and he died for us. God, I recognize right now that you've died for me, and you want relationship with me. And so we give that to God. Say, God, I want that. I need that. And so today we're going to pray, and then we're going to sing one last song and just commit this to our hearts right now as we consider what our next steps is. Would you pray with me? God, right now, for some of us here, we're wrestling with this next step of just really surrendering our life to you. And some of it's because maybe the narrative we believe about ourselves. God, would you set us free from that right now? Would you begin to let us see ourselves as just infinitely loved by you? That there's nothing that we've done that separates us from that. God, there's nothing that we can't go too far in the wrong direction. God, you are calling us home. You're calling us into your family as sons and as daughters. And God, today we submit to you and say, God, would you be the Lord and leader of my life? I need a new narrative to believe about me. God, I want to see myself the way that you see me. God, for some of us, we need to see the people around us the way that you see them. And God, would you help us then, because we can do that, would you help us to treat the people around us the way that you would treat them? And God, for that one person in our life, as we think about that one person right now in one arena, God, that we would choose that person, we'd be intentional this week to take a step, say, God, I want to get to know them. God, would you help reshape what I believe about them, because it's not true. It's a very small glimpse of a very big picture. So God, help me to lean in with curiosity. Help me to get to know. Help me to love people, specifically this one person, really, really well this week. In Jesus' name, amen.